how to hopefully build a real-life, no kidding, actual super sledge from Fallout 4. I don't know if I can do it, but I'm really gonna try. So, in Fallout 4, the super sledge has a liquid-fueled or hybrid-fueled rocket motor of some sort on the back of it. Sledgehammer, rocket, makes you swing it fast, hurts a lot, add a heating coil to the front, all that good stuff. I can't do that. Talk to NASA program manager, people that know stuff about rocket science, told them all my ideas about different options for fuel and what I could potentially run, because the impact of hitting something with a sledgehammer, they said there isn't really a feasible thing that I could use as far as an actual rocket motor. They said use solid fuel, fire it once, reload it. I'm going to do that with F-44s from Aerotech. They're pretty high-powered model rocket motors. I'm going to use that on one. But I want something that I can hit the button, and it goes, and you let off the button, and it stops, and you hit the button again, and it goes again. I want it to be on-off, like in the game. I feel like it'd be ridiculous if it didn't do that. So this is my plan. I'm going to take some tubing, and I'm going to mount it to the back of the sledgehammer. I'm going to cut the back half off, just like in the game. Mount some tubing on here. I'm going to put the EDF jet fan right there. A little injector system right here, flame holder right there, spring system. I don't know what I'm going to do as far as ignition to get the propane lit yet. And then here's the rest of it. So this is my little control box that's going to have all my stuff in it. That'll probably go here-ish on the handle. And then propane will come in from here, through a regulator, through an on-off switch, up through the handle, in soft line, come out, go into my box. And then it goes into a needle valve system. That's my idle circuit. Lets a little bit of propane through for low-speed idle. And then this is my electric solenoid that'll turn on my full throttle circuit, which dumps a ton of propane in whenever the fan goes really fast. So that is controlled by this relay or the microcontroller. I don't know if the microcontroller can put out enough juice to turn this thing on. I'll have to find out. If it doesn't, I'll have to run a relay that runs off the battery. Anyway, my microcontroller will be connected to my on-off switch, which makes the fan go full throttle and this open up whenever I want it to actually make some thrust and swing fast. And then it will also be, the microcontroller connects to the speed controller because it's an EDF jet fan, electric ducted fan motor, and those are usually brushless, and mine is brushless. Brushless outrunner, and it's like a 64 millimeter fan, I believe. Anyway, you can't just control them with voltage. You have to send a sine wave to them. This thing does that. I need to send a relay one of those little things on the jets that move the thingy, that move the little flappy doos back and forth. I can't remember what they're called right now. The servos. It sends a servo signal to the speed controller, and that tells it how fast to run the fan. So I don't know how to program my controller. I have no idea. I've never done it before, but I'm going to try to figure out how so that I can make this, make that, tell that to go really fast when I hit the on button, and when I'm not hitting the on button, it goes slow, and when I hit the on button, I want this to tell this or this to make this open and send lots of propane in so I get a big, bright blue afterburner flame shooting out the back that looks like the stuff from the game. The only difference is really going to be that I don't have a tank on the bottom side of the handle, and there's going to be space in the front for this to suck air in instead of a rocket motor that's welded directly to the back of the hammer. I don't know if any of this is going to work. There's probably going to be major changes in between, but I might as well get started and see how this thing turns out. Here's a quick look at the supplies that I think I need, including these exhaust pieces right here that have already been cut. If you do actually decide that you want to build one of these, which I don't recommend because it ended up being so dangerous, you can visit my website, jairus.com, and I'll have a full write-up with more information than the video, and also links to all the hard-to-find parts that I used in this build. Now I'm going to try to weld this stuff together to make the housing for the engine so I can get started on this project. But the problem is, I haven't welded for quite some time, a couple of years now. So I'm going to practice on these first because I don't know if I remember how to do it. People say it's like riding a bike, but I mean, riding a bike is about balance, and balance is something you just get. So I don't know. Anyway, we'll find out if I can do it. Well, it's not as hard as I remembered, and yeah, it doesn't really matter if it's pretty because it's supposed to be from Fallout, post-apocalyptic, and look rough and dirty and gross. I'm just gonna tack the whole way around, that way I don't burn through. I don't think I will, but I'm not gonna take the chance. I don't want to have to buy more pipe. Well, I fucked up that tack. Yonder Dremel. Okay. I got a good tack. It penetrated. You can see. I'm going to use this piece of paper as my guide to make my marks even around the outside of this motor for where I'm going to mount stuff, like the wires and the whatnot. So you wrap the paper around the tube and you tape it, and then you fold it in half twice, and you get your 4 even spots around the outside of the tube. Now for the back of this, I got my marks down for the flame holder, but I'm going to split this so I can have it come back together, give a little bit of a conical shape. So I'm going to make all my marks by folding the paper more, get the marks even so that I can split this a whole bunch, pinch it all together, and then weld it tight so it looks more like jet exhaust. Mostly for looks. I don't know if it's actually going to help it make thrust, but I think it'll look cool. I want to get this paint off the sledgehammer, that way I can weld to it, paint's not in the way, and then I'm going to knock the handle out so that it's easier to get around, because I'm going to put a metal handle on it. I've bought stuff at Harbor Freight before, and if you have, you know that most of their stuff that they sell there is junk. But I think this coating that's on this, which I'm pretty sure is powder coating, is probably the most resilient, strongest thing that they sell in the entire store. This is outrageous trying to take this off. Looks cool all silver, doesn't it? Ooh, it's pretty. It's a Sawzall. Look at how clean. Look at that. Chewed the crap out of it. Got it out though. Ooh. Safety goggles. There's chunks of sledgehammer handle laying all over the place. Alright, so at this point you might be thinking, this guy's spending all this time making this jet exhaust nozzle and it's not going to do anything. Realistically, this isn't going to make very much thrust at all. I want to make the jet nozzle because it looks cool and allows me to put my flame holder in, which will get the right looking flame coming out of the back. That's basically it. If you want to know how these work, do some research on your own. They're not that simple. Like an afterburner system in jet exhaust superheats the exhaust even more than it already is, and because of the extra pressure in the back, it makes the exhaust exit faster, and the speed of the exhaust exiting the engine is what produces more thrust. Now with this, I don't have superheated air coming in because it's running off of an EDF motor, or an EDF, you know, and it's just not going to have enough speed for the afterburner to make a difference, but it is going to make it look awesome. Ooh, that's in my skin. I got all the slits cut in the motor to make the nozzle. So now I'm going to put my flame holder in and pinch this together and weld all that stuff shut. Now I'm going to attempt to use coat hanger wire and a washer to make a flame holder for the inside of the afterburner section, which basically just creates a low pressure zone behind the washer and keeps the flame burning inside that housing. I'm going to try to weld this on here and then weld another one across it the other way and then slide it into the motor housing. Here's my flame holder. I'm gonna grind that wire out of the middle and clean it up and then stick it in my housing. Well, eyeball check's good. Hopefully I don't screw it up when I weld it together. Jet engine. So remember how I said I wanted this to look post-apocalyptic and I didn't care how my welds looked. Or at least I think I said that. Anyway, they look horrific. I mean, absolutely terrible. Look at this. It's just awful. And to me it looks kind of cool, but I think it would look cooler if they weren't quite so bad. So I'm gonna grind off stuff like this and try to make it look more like that, right? So I'm gonna clean this up. I think that looks better. I'm not sure if I'm gonna re-weld anything or not, but I at least like the way this looks pretty good now. If you're familiar with the game, it has a big nut that it looks like it screws into at the head of the sledgehammer. But I couldn't find a nut that looked like that anywhere, so I'm gonna use this, and I'm gonna grind the threads out so I can slide it down over it, because this pipe is long and I'm gonna cut it down some. It's 48 inches. So I need to grind the threads out so that this will slide over it. So then I will weld the pipe, I'll cut it to length, I'll weld the pipe to the head of the sledgehammer, and then I'll slide this over the handle, weld this to the sledgehammer, and then weld this side to the pipe. That way it's reinforced. So part of it's for looks, part of it's for reinforcement. Success! The only reason I got 48 is because they didn't have any pieces of 36-inch pipe. But it actually works out because I can cut this to length for my handle, and I got 1 inch because I felt like it gave you a good grip. But it also happens to fit my Aerotech motor perfectly. So I'm going to use a piece of this after I cut this to length for the handle to make the housing for this motor on the other sledgehammer. Worked out. Let's close. Makes no difference. Yep. Lose my head if it wasn't screwed on. If you're thinking, oh, he's lucky, he's got a shop, he can do all that stuff. It's like 34 degrees outside right now, and it's about that cold in here. It might be 40. It's not very much warmer. And also, all these tools are from like Craigslist and Harbor Freight and that kind of stuff. I'm cheap. I'm poor. I'm not cheap. I feel like I should explain something real quick. This has the fan housing. The overall area of the fan housing minus the center where the fan blades come out from and the motor, which are the same size, comes down to this. Like if you take that circle out of the middle, it becomes basically this size. This is slightly smaller, so I'm actually compressing the air slightly right here. This area allows it to expand slightly and therefore slow down, which is also where my flame holder is, so I hope that that makes it more efficient at holding the flame in the afterburner chamber. So to get some practice welding my handle to the sledgehammer, I'm going to do this pipe to the back of this one for the solid fuel rocket motor. That way I can see what it takes and get the welder set up for it and all that stuff. I don't care what the weld looks like on this. This is just to test to see what it'd be like if I had a lot of thrust on a sledgehammer. So this is my practice. All right, there's that. Now remember, if you can't weld very well, it doesn't matter if you're good with a grinder. Reinforcement. Now it's time to do this. Time to put these little jobbies on to hold the springs in place. Well, they're on there. They don't necessarily look good, but that is what the grinder is for. I just noticed that I can see the seam right here. It's less than hairline, but I'm gonna put another bead across this section also. Now she's stuck together. You know, realistically, for taking welding in high school, I feel like these aren't too bad. Considering when I first started, they looked like a blind monkey tried to do it. I feel like they aren't awful. I mean, they're awful, but they're not like really awful. Come here, I'll give you a close-up. Okay. How's that? Good, all right. Shout out to the Gamer Melon in Australia. I promised him I'd say it, and I did. Well, I got the wire wheel and the grinder out. I might as well take care of this. See these little weldy balls? I'm gonna knock those off with the grinder, and then I'm just gonna clean this up with the wire wheel. Ooh, pretty. I cleaned up those welds. Don't think I'm going to try to run pretty ones. Kind of like the way it looks just with the scratch sections on the back. And then this cleaned up with wire brush. I think that looks sweet. It's still messy and ugly, but I feel like it's pretty post-apocalyptic looking, and I'm going to leave it this way. So yeah, there's my housing. And it's pretty much done except for putting my fuel thingy in there and strapping the engine on and attaching it to the sledgehammer, and yeah, so it's not done, basically is what I'm saying. Might as well put this little doohickey on. Now I gotta mark the jet housing that fits in here for the retention wires that will attach to the springs for their placement to keep this thing centered. Well, it kind of keeps it self-centered since the bottom of it, or the inside of it's conical, but still, I'm going to put these marks on here, drill the holes, and stick coat hanger wire through to attach to the springs. That'll keep it pulled back into this, but allow it to spring out so that it doesn't shatter when I hit something with the sledgehammer. I should also mention I wasn't terribly worried about this because I have a spare housing for this thing. And spare motor, actually. There, wire's attached. Now I'll put little loops on this side, that way the springs can attach to it. Engine retention hooks. Free from a coat hanger. Cut those little recesses earlier, eyeballed them. Yeah, blind squirrel got the nut. How you like them apples? Yeah. Before I mark my holes for the fuel injection, I need to crimp the end shut and braze it to make sure that propane doesn't come out of the tip of it. I should also mention at this point that I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't brazed anything since, I don't know, it's been a really long time. I put this in the housing and marked off where I want the holes to be. Basically it's going to be 2, 1, 2, 5 little tiny holes with this little itty bitty tiny drill bit. And now you get to watch me drill them. You can see the drill bit wandered a little bit on one of them. I got holes though. I'm going to attempt this soldering brazing thing again because I got to put my fuel injector in. So hopefully this works. Alright, look, at this point this is a pain in the butt. If somebody wants to tell me in the comments what I'm doing wrong and why this, oh well, it's sticking to the steel, but it doesn't like, you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I mean, obviously that's why it's called JAIRUS Fall Master of None, because I don't know what I'm doing. I just do everything. Ah, I think I almost had it that time. Wish me luck. Alright, that's hilarious. The inside part was a nightmare. So I had to clean all the solder off of the bottom because you can see a little bit still up there. Can't get that to melt right now. But that dripped down, a lot of it, a huge amount, to the bottom. And the reason I had to try to fix it in the first place, and it was working out all right in the beginning, was because that little hole that you see in the middle is my center injector hole, and it was not lined up at all. It turned like 25 degrees. I think I'm at the point now where I can set up my plumbing. We'll start at the bottle. The bottle gets screwed into this hose. Right after it gets screwed into the hose, I'll split the hose, I'll put it on a shut-off valve. That's pretty much the only safety measure I have with this thing. Then I'll take a piece of hose, basically a long piece of hose and bring it to this, which is my regulator. And then after that, the hose that comes off of this will go through the bottom of the handle. It'll go up through the tube, out of the hole that I cut, and then it'll connect to this piece. And this connects to compression fitting, and I know you're not supposed to use compression fittings on with gas, right? It's just supposed to be for fluids and stuff. Anyway, I don't really care. I like to live dangerous. That will go into a small piece of copper that allows it to hook up to this T fitting, and then another little piece here will go into that elbow. That way my line splits. My electric solenoid will control my full throttle, and this will be my idle circuit. Those go into these crush fittings, and then I had to convert this from pipe thread to NPT. It'll convert back to copper pipe and into this, and then this side will go from 3/8 down to quarter because I couldn't find a needle valve, metering valve that had 3/8, so I had to convert down to quarter for that, and then quarter back up to 3/8, and then back to the T, and then everything's back together and you're in the normal fuel flow again. And then I'll take the 3/8 line and run it up here, and it'll hit this, and then I'll convert that down to a quarter with this fitting, and that goes into the motor. And that's how my plumbing system works. So now I just need to put it all together. Good enough. Ooh, that's tight. That's good. Also, this is actual propane line, and it's good to 350 psi. Alright, I just looked up propane pressure. At the temperature that it is around here, most of the time it's 30 or below right now, but even in the odd event that it became 60 degrees, you're only looking at 90 psi out of a propane tank. At 30, it's sitting at 50 psi, so I'm not even going to get close to touching a pressure that should even matter. I really probably don't even need to run a regulator until it's summertime here, so I'm good. Whoop. Whoop. Teflon tape for the win. Tight. Oh man. There's no way that is coming off. Not a chance. While I'm putting this together, I figured I'd tell you a couple things that I learned when I went to get these fittings and everything. Everybody thinks, or not everybody, lots of people know, a lot of people at these hardware stores tend to think that there's just one type of thread, and that's not the case at all. In fact, there's a bunch of them, because some of this stuff doesn't fit together on its own. I found out that there is NPT, which I knew about NPT. That's National Pipe Thread, at least that's what people think it stands for. It's actually American Standard Pipe Thread Tapered. Then there's NPSC, American Standard Straight Coupling Pipe Thread. And then NPTR, American Standard Tapered Railing Pipe Thread. And then NPSM, American Standard Straight Mechanical Pipe Thread. Then there's NPSL, American Standard Straight Locknut Pipe Thread. NPTF, American Standard Pipe Thread Tapered for Dry Seal. Then there's BSPP, British Standard Pipe Thread Parallel. And then there's British Standard Pipe Thread Tapered, which is BSPT. So, lots of different threads out there. Lots of them. I found all that out. And then when I started putting this stuff together, I was like, oh man, what if this white Teflon tape is like reactant with propane and it eats through the stuff and blows out the seal? Well, I looked it up, and yellow Teflon, well, yellow PTFE tape is the same stuff. It's just higher density and thickness so that there's less chance of leaks. Other than that, it's the same thing. It's still PTFE, which is polyterafluoroethylene or something like that. Anyway, it's all PTFE, so it doesn't matter. I'm good. But it's kind of ridiculous the amount of different threads that are out there. Oh, and then there's that stuff that goes on hydraulic line fittings too. That has different threads also. Can't remember what it's called right now. Oh, AN threads. AN threads are separate from everything else also. So I just figured I'd discuss that real quick, because seriously, you'd think there'd be a little more standardization. There wouldn't be that many... Oh, I'm doing that the wrong direction. There won't be that many things. And thread tape doesn't actually cause the seal. It's basically just to keep micro abrasions and micro leaks from happening whenever you put stuff together. So it is good to use because it ensures a seal, but the threads are actually what make the seal. Read that too. Didn't know it. Now we both do. How cool is that? Knowledge. Gotta have knowledge. That's my favorite thing. These pieces will sit like this. That way the gas is split, and this piece can sit on top. I think. Maybe I'll run it this way. Yeah, I'll run it like that. I think. This would be a lot easier if I didn't have to make everything as small as possible to fit on a sledgehammer. Or if I had experience in plumbing. So since I'm sitting here working on Teflon taping threads on compression fittings that you're not supposed to use on gas line, these needle valves have compression fittings, and these are made for flow control of gas. Not necessarily propane, but on the little baggie that comes with these, it says that it's made for controlling venting gas. And it has compression fittings in it. You can't get these without compression fittings, at least not at the hardware store. I don't know, maybe you can online, but why is that? If you're not supposed to use compression fittings with gas, why do they make these things? That doesn't make sense to me. What's the difference between tube and pipe? I don't know. I decided to change my plumbing setup because I had too much weight with all these conversion parts, and I want everything, pretend the table is the handle, like the handle goes through here. I want it to be supported by the handle, so when I hit stuff, it's not going to put a huge amount of force on the copper and crack stuff. So I want most of this to sit on the handle. So my new idea is to still use these pieces to come over here, but normally I would have had to convert from this to the small stuff to get into my metering valve for the idle circuit. So now I'm going to try to crush this 3/8 pipe down so that it's tight enough that I can fit it on some small line like this, because I bought more of this stuff. I'll squish this down immediately and go to 1/4 inch and try to mash it into around it and solder it, and then take it into these fittings there. That way everything sits on top. There is an immense amount of force whenever you hit something, pushing on all this weight from all these converters and everything, because these are heavy. Anyway, I'm going to try it and see if it works. I don't know if it will or not, and I'm not that great at brazing, so hopefully this all works out. I got my little copper turnaround things made. It doesn't matter which way it flows through this, it only matters which way it flows through the solenoid. So I'm going to put these in and braze everything together, and almost done. Oh, I didn't put flux on. Here we go. Well, I think I did it. My measurements were okay for reducing the pipe down for the size of the motor and the fan housing, or the fan holder and all that, because that's standard diameter through there. So this is the right size. It's just I didn't make the front of the housing deep enough. The motor should be ending right here where it starts to constrict, and it's not. It ends like up here, which is ridiculous. So I measured wrong. I'm gonna have to measure again and add a ring to the front of this with some of my scrap pipe so that this sits where it's supposed to, basically right there. So time to do more welding. If you noticed before, I was using a Makita grinder, and now I'm using a fine grinder from Germany. The reason I got this was because my Makita sounded like it was starting to die, and I didn't want it to die, so I got this because there's a YouTuber called AVE, and he does tool reviews and all kinds of other awesome stuff, and the guy's really funny, but he takes everything apart and finds out what's actually good, and he said that this one was good. Or, well, except for a couple things, but still, it's supposed to be a great tool. So thank you, AVE, for finding me a new grinder. Also, AVE is really hysterical and entertaining. You should check out his channel. It has an incredible amount of power. Incredible. That's awesome. I'm going to cut that slit out for the wires that come out of the motor, but I'm going to cover this with metal on top to give the wires more clearance. Plus that way they slide in and out easier, I believe, instead of dragging through that slot. And that means I'll have to cut this, put a piece of metal over it, and then I'll have it recessed up here for the wires to actually stick out. Should work out pretty well. I almost forgot to cut those notches for the clippy doos on the fan. I need to bend and cut 8 of these from this threaded rod because I'm going to weld the housing to the sledgehammer head at each of the 8 points on the way around. So this is going to take a little bit of time. Now the problem with this is when I go to weld these to this housing, I can't do it at the same time that I'm welding it to the sledgehammer because there's plastic in there, right? And if I weld this to the sledgehammer at the same time, I can't put this in, but I can't have that in there while I weld it. So basically I'm gonna weld these pieces onto this without the motor in, and then after I finish doing that, I'll put the motor in, and then I'll put it to the sledgehammer, and I'll bend these all into place, and then I'll weld it to the sledgehammer. Hopefully without melting the motor. Hopefully. That's really irritating. Luckily, even though I broke the crap out of this just now, I have a spare one that the blades broke on when I rammed the jet into the ground. Faster than it could fall because it was full throttle and I pointed it straight down instead of going straight up. I was trying to do stunts. Anyway, I'm gonna switch the blades onto this and that should solve my problem. For now, till I break this one. Then I'm screwed. All these little threaded pieces that I cut, I just eyeballed. You can see my little marks there, right there. Anyway, all those little marks around there. That's where I'm going to weld these on to the housing, and basically they'll be like that at first, and then I'll bend them in to meet up with the sledgehammer after I get the fan put in. I hope that's enough to make this thing stay in one piece. I feel like it should be, but I'm really not sure. New plastic housing installed with the fan blade, and the springs are reattached. So I think I have an idea for how to bend these without breaking anything. So I tried to bend them in like you saw, and that didn't work. I can't get them to bend enough, so I decided to cut little slots in them with the Dremel, basically about halfway through, and that way they'll be easy to bend right at that point, and I can get them attached to the sledgehammer. And then I'll weld in that cut that I made. Hopefully I don't break any off. Oh, it's so easy to bend. So easy. Look at that. Just, oh, perfect. I'm so glad that worked. Oh, that one's very close to breaking. There goes one. Before I weld more, I'm gonna let this thing cool off because I do not want to risk melting my plastic jet engine dealio. Looks okay so far. I need to go out to my other garage to get, whoa, that's nose deep. I need to go out to my other garage to get big bolts to finish up the mount points for the housing on the sledgehammer. And it's the blizzard of 2016. I found some in my cooler full of randomness. Yeah, that's at the knees. Whoa. Oh, now it's not so deep. It's like up to the roof right there. It's pretty. If I'm not mistaken, these are from a Yamaha XS650. I think. Turned one into a cafe racer. I'm pretty sure these are from something on the back of it. This doesn't really have to be that exact. It's mostly just cosmetic. Now I'm going to blast these two little jobby doos onto their respective locations. Approximately. I'm not going to measure anything. I'm just going to blast them on there. Alright, I know somebody's going to say something because I'm welding on galvanized, but you've got to weld the crap out of a lot of galvanized to actually make you sick. So I don't really care. Who'd have thought installing support brackets on a rocket-powered sledgehammer, well, jet-powered sledgehammer, would be so much fun. Time to cut my extensions. Now it comes down to it. It's time to put the plumbing on, and I'm going to cut a hole in the pipe here for the propane tube to come out and connect to all of it, and then I'll bind this together with a little piece of 3/8 inch copper. Oh man. You've been recording for a really long time. I very quickly put the electrical system together so I can test this thing. It's all relatively simple how all this goes together, considering I am terrible at electrical stuff, but this honestly wasn't too bad. The battery gets hooked up to this, you splice into it for this, and then yeah, it's pretty simple. One switch activates this little jobby here. You can hear it clicking, and the other one turns the fan on full throttle. And then I have two adjuster knobs here that adjust my idle and full throttle settings. And I'll make all this look pretty and mount it on there fully later, but I figured I'd just give this thing a little test right now. So let's fire it up. For first try, that ain't too bad. So now I'm going to use silicone to help seal the minute leaks that I have in my fittings on this. And the reason that I'm not too worried about it, and I'm just going to use silicone to reduce the amount that comes out, is because the pressure that I'm running is not very high. And as an example, when there were leaks, I used a lighter and tried to light the leak on fire, and it would just puff a tiny flame. and then it would go out. Because as soon as you burned that dispersed propane, it wasn't leaking fast enough to maintain a flame. Now the reason I'm using silicone is because it's flexible. I'm gonna put this stuff on. It's just a small safety precaution. I'm not really too worried about blowing myself up or catching myself on fire, but you know, famous last words. If this stuff gets hit and moved around, it'll help to keep the propane in and keep the leaks to a minimum. It's just an extra safety precaution. Anyway, silicone. You might be thinking you shouldn't be touching all that silicone with your hands, but I'm not allergic to silicone or latex, ladies, or anything really for that matter. I got no allergies. So I'm not really worried about touching this stuff with my fingers. I should also mention after that big long propane speech that that's why I think that I need more propane injected and not necessarily just a bigger flame holder, because if 10% is the upper limit for flammability of propane in the atmosphere, that means I need to put a huge amount of propane into this thing if I'm gonna run the fan that fast, because there has to be a stupid amount of fuel, because there's a huge amount of air traveling through this housing, because that fan puts out a massive amount of thrust. Well, massive compared to like a house fan. I mean, this thing's an EDF fan, but still, it's enough thrust to make a little airplane fly. I think it's like a pound. Anyway. So anyway, now I just need to wire all the wires together, extend the wires for the battery, and put long wires on that go to the switch, and put everything on the sledgehammer, and then do some more testing. I also forgot to mention that on my servo controllers I just popped these little covers off, and the servo box that I used was a little tackle box, a little 6-partition tackle box that you use for flies. Alright, word to the wise. When you've got wires this small, just burn the insulation off. Don't try to actually strip them, because you're just going to end up breaking the strands of the wire inside, which I have done many times, and that's why they're so short coming out of this container now. Now it's just time to mount the wiring. Now that I have this clamped on, make sure it doesn't move, make sure I don't get any more leaks. So I've got my speed controller right here. It's wired up to the engine right there, and then I have my wires for the servo stuff mounted underneath, well, ran underneath this plate. And the signal wire right here is going to run down inside the handle to the switches. This box that I wrapped with the aluminum tape, and I need to connect the power and ground to the power and ground that come out of the speed controller, and then the 2 signal wires for this to switch between the 2 servo controls will run down the handle also to the switch. And then I will run the wires from my solenoid down the handle to its switch respectively, and I'll be finished with the wiring. Well, and then I'll also have to run the wires out the end of the handle to run to the battery. Speed controller wires connected here, shrink wrapped speed controller. The positive wire from the solenoid right here comes into the positive wire that comes from the battery to the speed controller there. Both of those wires, positive and negative from the speed controller, are routed behind the hose clamp right here and run out back here and are collected with all the other wires. The 2 signal wires are routed underneath. They bind up with the other wires right here. I started doing some of the marker work on there and painting the knobs. And then this is going to run through the handle with the tube down to the bottom. I need to cut a hole for the switch and wire everything at the bottom, and then stuff it all inside the handle. Like I said, when the wire's this small, don't try to strip the wire, just burn the insulation off, because the threads inside are so small, you'll just break it, like I did. Again, didn't learn from my mistake. When I was a kid, I used to just be notorious for twisting wires together. If I could teach myself anything when I was young, it would be that I should just take the time to solder stuff, because it's incredible what a difference it makes knowing that the wire's not going to come apart because you soldered it instead of just twisting the thing together. He spent so much time hoping and wondering if the problem with what I built was with whether the wires had come apart because I twisted them together. I don't know why I didn't learn to solder sooner. Speaking of the efficiency of solder, shrink wrap is absolutely incredible. Talk about making a job easier. Screw electrical tape. This stuff is where it's at. How are you going to possibly know which goes to what? Well, that's where this comes into play. Just take a Sharpie, make some marks on the wires. It doesn't matter what it is. If they're the same color, just put some marks on it that you'll remember what it goes to, and when you stick it through, you'll know where to connect it. Easy as that. For instance, I have two yellow wires. One is positive, one's negative, so the positive one is striped with red Sharpie and the negative one is striped with blue. I've ruined too many bits by getting them too hot in the steel and melting the epoxy that holds them to the shaft from these little Dremel bits. So I'm cooling this bit off with ice. I can't believe how much faster I cut through the steel with that being chilled with the ice cube. I think I got it. Yes! Now I've got all my wiring routed through the handle. 3 signal wires get wired to the blue, which controls which servo controller is telling my speed controller how fast to make the fan, and then the red one is just simply ground disconnect for my electronic solenoid. It's done. I knew after I finished this thing it was going to take some more refining and tuning, and I want to show you what I had to do to make this fully work. And honestly, this thing is stupid dangerous. The amount of heat that comes out is immense. You can very easily burn yourself. I don't want to be cliche, but do not build this yourself at home unless you are willing to risk getting severely burned or severely frozen by liquid propane in case you spring a leak somewhere. And I definitely didn't tell you to, and you can't sue me for it. Anyway, this works really well, but you have to have a pretty substantial flow of propane. Now, the connection that I had on the end of my hose was way too small, and here you can see it. I had to drill that out and then knock a check valve out of the connection on the hose, which you're probably not even allowed to do. I don't really know. Anyway, once you get that out, it stops the restriction of flow from the propane and allows you to run this thing really fast with a huge flame coming out of it, which is awesome. Also, I added a grill igniter, you can see here, and now I'll just show you how to use it real quick. So you turn it on, you push the on button, the LED indicators from the servo controllers that light up, that way you know you have power. Then you adjust it so that you have idle flow from the fan. Then you turn your propane on from the needle valve just a little bit, and you press the button on the grill igniter. That fires up your idle flame. The most reliable way to make this run then is to turn the idle fuel flow up more and turn the idle fan speed up more. And the reason for that is because when you press the buttons to make this thing go to full throttle, the fan reacts extremely slow if it's running really slow. You turn the propane flow up and you turn the idle fan speed up. That way the fan reacts fast and the propane reacts really fast. That way you can just push the button and it goes to full throttle, and you don't have to worry about like hitting one before the other or anything like that. And you can let off of them at basically the same time, and it usually still stays lit. If you want to make sure that it stays lit, you can just hold the fuel switch in for slightly longer than the fan switch. But nonetheless, it's intensely reliable. And the only things that I changed really from when I built it were the grill igniter. I changed the valve that goes into the propane tank, and then here you can see my flame holder that I put inside, and I went through 3 or 4 different designs of this before I got one that actually works. And this thing looks crude, but it actually holds the flame extremely well, and it's a modified version of the last one that I tried. So this ended up working out pretty well. Anyway, thanks for watching this stupid long video, and yeah, I'll have another one soon with a way more destructive weapon, and now there's going to be links on the screen for other videos right before I show you how this thing works.